The Imperial Dominion had ruled a vast portion of the Spiral Arm for nearly 3 centuries. Their rule was not maintained through diplomacy or alliances. It was maintained through fleets, vast, disciplined armadas capable of erasing resistance before it could organize. Every system they claimed eventually accepted the same reality. When the Dominion arrived, resistance ended. Their warships were designed to represent overwhelming superiority. Massive carriers carried wings of strike craft capable of saturating entire planetary defenses. Battlecruisers carried weapons powerful enough to crack moons apart. Destroyer squadrons moved in flawless formation, guided by a command network that connected every ship in a perfectly synchronized structure. The Dominion believed war should never be uncertain. Battles were supposed to end quickly, decisively, and always in their favor. Across hundreds of conquered systems, that belief had never truly been challenged. So when a border reconnaissance cruiser detected a single human vessel drifting near Imperial space, the situation appeared trivial. The ship's signal was weak. Its engines fluctuated inconsistently. Long-range scans showed hull damage scattered across its exterior plating. To Imperial analysts, the explanation was obvious. A damaged exploration craft had wandered too far and lost control of its navigation systems. Perhaps it had fled some internal conflict within human territory. Perhaps it had suffered mechanical failure during deep space travel. Either way, it was alone, vulnerable, and sitting dangerously close to Imperial borders. Humanity itself had never been viewed as a serious military power. They were known for curiosity, experimentation, and rapid technological adaptation. But they lacked the massive fleets that defined the Dominion's military strength. Their ships were fewer, smaller, and rarely encountered in Imperial space. Still, Imperial doctrine allowed no unknown vessel to drift freely near their territory. A response fleet was ordered immediately. Not a patrol squadron. Not a small defensive force. An armada. Hyperspace ruptured across the edge of the system as hundreds of Imperial ships arrived in formation. Destroyers emerged first, establishing the outer perimeter. Behind them came heavy cruisers and support carriers, forming layers of containment designed to prevent any possible escape. At the center of the formation arrived the flagship, an immense command carrier responsible for coordinating the fleet's movements and maintaining tactical dominance over the battlefield. The human vessel remained motionless. It did not accelerate. It did not attempt to transmit surrender codes. It simply drifted, its damaged hull reflecting the distant light of nearby stars. Imperial scanners swept across it repeatedly. The results remained consistent with the original analysis. Engine instability. Structural damage. Minimal energy output. Nothing about the ship suggested danger. Inside the command carrier, officers watched the tactical display with calm confidence. The lone contact representing the human vessel looked insignificant compared to the massive network of Imperial ships surrounding it. Hundreds of vessels formed a tightening sphere around the drifting craft. Escape vectors disappeared one by one. Navigation corridors closed. Every possible route out of the system was blocked by the Dominion fleet. Standard capture procedures were initiated. The Dominion maintained a long-standing tradition when dealing with technologically inferior species. Instead of destroying every intruding vessel, they often captured one intact as a demonstration of Imperial superiority. The damaged human ship would serve that purpose perfectly. Boarding teams prepared inside assault craft. Tractor beam systems warmed as targeting solutions locked onto the drifting vessel. Once the command was given, the human ship would be pulled into the fleet and secured without difficulty. From the Imperial perspective, the situation had already ended. One ship. Hundreds of warships. The outcome was never in question. What none of the Imperial officers considered was the possibility that the human vessel had chosen this exact location intentionally. They saw a broken ship. They saw a weak opponent. They saw an easy capture. And because the Dominion had spent centuries winning battles through sheer numerical superiority, they never considered the idea that someone might exploit that confidence. As the Imperial fleet completed its containment formation, their ships moved closer to the human vessel. Cruisers adjusted their positions. Destroyers tightened their defensive ring. Massive carriers drifted inward, reducing the distance between ships until the Armada formed a dense sphere of warships around the lone contact. Every movement followed established doctrine. Every maneuver increased their control of the battlefield. And every adjustment unknowingly placed them deeper into the precise position the human vessel needed them to occupy. The ship continued drifting quietly at the center of the formation. No distress call was transmitted. No weapon systems powered up. The vessel simply waited as the Imperial fleet surrounded it completely. Across the command carrier's tactical display, the containment ring finally locked into its final configuration. The human vessel was now trapped. No escape routes. No reinforcements. No possibility of survival. At least, that was what the Dominion believed. What they didn't know was that the ship they had surrounded had never intended to escape. It had never intended to fight them directly. And the damage they believed proved its weakness had been carefully manufactured to lure them closer. Because the lone human vessel drifting helplessly in the middle of their fleet was not a victim. It was bait. Inside the human vessel, the situation was very different from what the Imperial fleet expected. The damaged exterior told a convincing story, but everything inside the ship functioned with calm precision. Systems operated quietly, energy levels remained stable, and every console displayed controlled readings rather than emergency warnings. The damage on the hull had never been accidental. Each burn mark had been carefully placed. Each unstable engine signal had been designed to appear authentic to long-range scanners. Even the drifting movement of the vessel had been calculated so that it would appear helpless while remaining perfectly positioned. At the center of the control deck, the ship's captain watched the tactical display without urgency. Small red markers representing Imperial warships continued to multiply across the screen. Each new hyperspace arrival appeared exactly where the predictive models had expected it. The Empire was behaving according to pattern. For centuries, the Dominion had relied on the same approach whenever encountering a weaker opponent. They surrounded first. They dominated the battlefield through overwhelming presence. Only after the enemy realized resistance was hopeless did the fleet move in to capture or destroy the target. It was intimidation disguised as strategy. But intimidation required time. And time was exactly what the human ship needed. The captain reviewed the positioning of the surrounding warships as their formation tightened. Destroyer squadrons sealed the outer edges of the containment zone. Heavy cruisers drifted into support positions while massive carriers adjusted their trajectories to block hyperspace exit routes. The density of ships steadily increased. That was the key variable. The technology hidden within the vessel required one very specific condition to work effectively: a large concentration of extremely massive objects gathered within a limited space. Imperial warships were ideal for that. Their hulls were enormous. Their reactors produced immense energy signatures. Their mass alone influenced the surrounding gravitational field even when their engines were idle. Individually, those effects were insignificant. But when hundreds of ships gathered close together, their combined gravitational presence created subtle distortions in the surrounding space. Normally, those distortions meant nothing. But with the right technology, they could be manipulated. Deep inside the ship, sealed behind layers of reinforced containment systems, rested the vessel's true purpose. The device installed there had never been tested in a real battle. It had originally been designed as an experimental navigation tool capable of studying gravitational interactions on a stellar scale. Human engineers had eventually discovered a far more interesting application. Instead of merely observing gravity, the system could amplify and redirect it. The gravitational manipulation core slowly warmed as energy flowed into its containment rings. Power levels rose carefully to avoid detection by external scanners. From the outside, the ship still appeared barely functional. Inside, calculations ran continuously. The surrounding Imperial fleet unknowingly provided the raw mass required to turn the device into something far more dangerous than a scientific instrument. The captain monitored the formation carefully. Too few ships would make the effect insignificant. Too many ships positioned incorrectly would disrupt the reaction chain. But the Dominion fleet followed rigid doctrine. Their formations were standardized across every battle group. Destroyers maintained consistent spacing. Cruisers occupied predictable support angles. The flagship always positioned itself at the center of command authority. Predictable structure created predictable vulnerabilities. More ships continued closing the distance. The containment ring grew tighter. Several cruisers moved closer to the human vessel to prepare tractor beam capture procedures. Boarding craft launched from carrier bays, slowly drifting into staging positions. The Empire believed they were minutes away from claiming an easy prize. The captain studied the tactical display one final time. Every ship was exactly where the models had predicted. The gravitational interactions between their massive hulls had already begun creating the subtle distortions the system required. Tiny fluctuations in space curvature appeared across the sensor network. Most navigation systems would automatically correct for such minor variations. But the human ship had no intention of allowing those systems to adapt. A quiet signal moved through the vessel's internal network. Power routing completed its final adjustments. The gravitational core reached operational capacity. The surrounding fleet had unknowingly provided everything necessary to trigger the reaction. Hundreds of enormous warships packed tightly together. Mass. Energy. Predictable movement. The perfect environment for the experiment. The captain finally issued a single command. Gravitational resonance field ready. The system responded immediately. Outside the vessel, nothing changed at first. The human ship still appeared helpless, floating quietly at the center of the Imperial formation. Tractor beams remained locked. Boarding vessels continued drifting closer. But deep within the ship's core, space itself had begun to shift. Tiny distortions formed like ripples across the invisible structure of gravity surrounding the fleet. The Empire believed they had surrounded a powerless target. What they had actually done was gather in exactly the place where the trap needed them to be. And the moment they moved any closer, the entire Armada would become part of the weapon. The Imperial flagship issued its final preparation command. Boarding craft aligned their vectors while tractor arrays locked firmly onto the drifting human vessel. To the Dominion commanders observing the operation, the situation had already reached its inevitable conclusion. One more order and the damaged ship would be secured. Before that command could be transmitted, a series of minor alerts began appearing across the fleet's sensor network. At first, the anomalies looked insignificant. Navigation systems registered small fluctuations in the surrounding gravitational field. Several destroyers reported minor positional drift, no more than a few meters from their assigned coordinates. Such corrections were routine in large formations. Automated thrusters compensated instantly. The fleet remained stable. But the fluctuations did not stop. Instead, they began to spread. Another cruiser reported slight trajectory instability. A carrier's guidance computer recalculated its orientation twice within seconds. Small warning signals appeared across the navigation systems of dozens of ships. Imperial officers initially dismissed the readings as interference caused by the large concentration of mass within the fleet itself. Hundreds of heavy warships positioned close together could create minor gravitational distortions. Normally, those distortions remained harmless. This time they did not. Without warning, the fluctuations intensified. Across the Armada, navigation computers attempted to compensate for increasing drift. Thrusters fired in controlled bursts as ships adjusted their position relative to one another. Those corrections should have restored balance. Instead, they made the problem worse. The human vessel at the center of the formation activated the gravitational manipulation core. Invisible waves moved outward through space. The distortions were subtle at first, far too small to trigger immediate alarm. But each shift in gravity nudged nearby ships slightly off their assigned positions. When one vessel moved, its mass altered the gravitational pull experienced by the ships around it. Those ships reacted by adjusting their thrusters. Each adjustment created a new distortion. The reaction chain spread rapidly across the entire formation. A destroyer drifted too close to a cruiser. Its automated guidance system fired stabilizers to push it away. The resulting thrust shifted the cruiser's orientation just enough to disrupt the positioning of the carrier beside it. The carrier's engines responded. That movement influenced another squadron. Within seconds, dozens of ships were correcting their trajectories simultaneously. The gravitational core increased its output. Space itself bent slightly around the human vessel, amplifying the natural distortions created by the fleet's enormous mass. The effect cascaded through the formation like a wave moving through water. Ships began drifting in unpredictable directions. Navigation systems struggled to interpret the constantly shifting gravitational environment. Guidance computers issued contradictory instructions as local space curvature changed faster than their calculations could adjust. The first collision happened less than a minute after the distortions began. Two destroyers attempting to correct their drift fired thrusters at the same moment. Their engines pushed them directly toward one another. Both ships attempted emergency reversal, but the gravitational currents pulled their massive hulls together. The impact shattered armor plating and sent debris spinning through the formation. The collision triggered panic. Nearby ships maneuvered abruptly to avoid the wreckage. Those evasive movements disrupted the positions of other vessels. The fleet's perfectly organized structure began unraveling as more captains attempted to stabilize their ships. Missile systems miscalculated firing solutions as targeting computers struggled with inconsistent spatial readings. Several defensive batteries discharged accidentally while attempting to recalibrate tracking systems. Explosions spread through sections of the Armada. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers only to find their guidance systems unable to maintain stable flight paths. Some craft collided with their own hangar structures during emergency returns. The Imperial command network filled with overlapping orders. Stabilize formation. Reduce engine output. Correct gravitational drift. But every attempt to regain control only amplified the instability. The closer the ships were positioned, the stronger their combined gravitational interactions became. The human device manipulated those interactions continuously, pushing the entire fleet further into chaos. Cruisers collided with destroyers. Carriers drifted into one another while attempting emergency maneuvers. Massive hulls scraped against each other, sending fragments of armor and shattered weapon systems spinning into nearby vessels. Within minutes, the Imperial Armada ceased functioning as a coordinated force. Instead, it became a storm of uncontrolled movement. Ships tumbled through space while engines fired desperately in every direction. Debris fields expanded across the battlefield as more vessels collided or lost propulsion systems entirely. At the center of the destruction, the human vessel remained perfectly stable. Its systems predicted every gravitational wave created by the manipulation core. Small thruster adjustments kept the ship balanced while the surrounding fleet tore itself apart. What had once been a disciplined armada of hundreds of warships was now a collapsing mass of drifting wreckage and crippled vessels. The Dominion had arrived believing numbers guaranteed victory. Now those numbers had become the very force destroying them. By the time the Imperial command network began understanding what had happened, the battle was already decided. Not through a final weapon strike, not through a decisive explosion, but through the slow collapse of the fleet itself. The Dominion had built its military strength around overwhelming numbers, perfect coordination, and rigid formations. Those same strengths had now turned against them. Across the system, damaged ships drifted without control. Some vessels had lost engines after emergency maneuvers overloaded their propulsion systems. Others had suffered direct impacts when nearby cruisers or destroyers were pulled into unstable trajectories. Entire squadrons spun helplessly through space as their navigation arrays struggled to interpret the constantly shifting gravitational environment. The once flawless Imperial formation no longer existed. Instead of a unified armada, there were hundreds of isolated ships scattered across expanding debris fields. Communication channels filled with emergency transmissions as captains attempted to regain control of their vessels. Command signals from the flagships struggled to reach ships whose antenna arrays had been damaged during collisions. Even those vessels that remained mostly intact could not coordinate movement. Every attempt to accelerate or reposition created additional gravitational interactions with nearby ships, forcing them to halt their maneuvers before causing new collisions. The battlefield had become a trap of their own mass. At the center of the chaos, the human vessel began reducing power to its gravitational manipulation core. The invisible distortions that had twisted the battlefield slowly faded. Space returned to its natural equilibrium as the system powered down. But the damage had already been done. Without the artificial distortions, the Imperial fleet finally stabilized. Yet stabilization did not restore their strength. Too many ships were crippled. Too many had lost propulsion or navigation capability. Too many remained trapped within tangled clusters of wreckage created by earlier collisions. The Armada that had entered the system with perfect discipline could no longer operate as a fighting force. Inside the human ship, the tactical display showed the final outcome with quiet clarity. Hundreds of Imperial contacts remained scattered across the system, but none possessed the ability to pursue or reorganize quickly enough to threaten the vessel. The captain observed the drifting fleet in silence for a moment. No victory celebration followed. No dramatic announcement marked the end of the battle. The mission had always been simple: prove that the Empire's greatest advantage could become its greatest weakness. Before departing, the human vessel transmitted a short message toward the damaged Imperial flagship. The signal carried no threat and no insult. It contained only a single statement. "Your numbers were never the problem." The transmission spread slowly across the disrupted Imperial communication grid. Some ships received it immediately. Others captured fragments of the message as their damaged receivers struggled to interpret the signal. Moments later, the human vessel activated its engines. Unlike the crippled warships surrounding it, the ship moved smoothly through space. Its thrusters adjusted carefully to avoid the drifting wreckage fields scattered throughout the system. Each maneuver was precise, calculated, and completely unchallenged. Several Imperial vessels attempted to track the ship's departure, but none possessed the mobility required to intercept it. Even the flagship remained locked in a slow stabilization process, its navigation system still recovering from the gravitational chaos. The lone human vessel passed through the outer edges of the battlefield without resistance. Hundreds of Imperial warships remained behind, damaged or immobilized, their once perfect formation reduced to scattered debris and powerless hulls. When the human ship finally engaged its hyperspace drive, it vanished from the system as quietly as it had arrived. No massive fleet escorted it home. No victory parade awaited its return. But the consequences of what had happened would travel far beyond that single battlefield. Across the galaxy, reports would eventually spread about the day an Imperial armada had surrounded a single human vessel and lost. Not because humanity possessed the largest fleet. Not because they had fired the most powerful weapon. But because they had understood something the Dominion never questioned. Numbers alone did not guarantee victory. Sometimes the smartest move in a war was convincing your enemy to bring the weapon that would defeat them. And on that day, the Empire had delivered that weapon themselves.